Somewhere in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest court, the nearest police department, and the nearest judge, a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is carrying 5,000 people. And something has just gone terribly wrong. A sailor has committed a crime. On land, the answer would be simple: call the police. There is no such option at sea. The nearest law enforcement, the nearest judicial system, the nearest jail is the ship itself. And the person who has to decide what happens next is not a judge, not a jury, not a police chief. It is the aircraft carrier's commanding officer, the captain. This is one of the most extraordinary and least understood realities of naval service. Aboard a U.S. Navy warship, the captain holds legal authority that exists almost nowhere else in American life. The power to investigate, to judge, and to punish, all under a single legal system that follows the ship wherever it goes. Today, we are going inside exactly what happens when a sailor commits a crime aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier at sea. The legal system that governs the ship. The captain's extraordinary authority. The brig hidden deep inside the hull. And the careful, deliberate process that decides a sailor's fate. Sometimes without a single lawyer, a single jury, or a single day in a civilian courtroom. What you are about to learn reveals a side of military life that almost no one outside the Navy ever sees. The law that follows the ship. Why the ocean doesn't mean no law. To understand how a U.S. Navy captain handles a crime at sea, you first have to understand the legal foundation that makes it possible. A body of law that exists specifically because ships operate outside the reach of ordinary civilian courts. It is called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, or UCMJ. Congress established this system under its constitutional authority to govern the land and naval forces of the United States, and it applies to every single member of the armed forces: soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, wherever in the world they happen to be. It does not matter if a sailor is standing on a pier in San Diego or hundreds of miles out to sea. The UCMJ travels with them. This matters enormously for a ship like an aircraft carrier. When that vessel is underway, it is, in a very real legal sense, sovereign American territory moving through international waters, carrying its own complete legal system aboard. There is no waiting for local police, because there is no local police. There is no calling in outside investigators immediately, because outside investigators are potentially weeks away. The Navy's own justice system has to function entirely self-contained, from the moment an incident occurs until the ship eventually reaches port. The UCMJ divides offenses into two broad categories. Some crimes are unique to military life and have no real civilian equivalent. Failing to obey a lawful order, being absent without leave, dereliction of duty. Other offenses mirror civilian crimes directly: assault, theft, drug use, and, in the most serious cases, violent crimes. Whatever the offense, if it happens aboard a U.S. Navy ship, it falls under this single legal framework. And here is the detail that surprises most civilians the most. The person who initiates the response to nearly all of this is not a lawyer, a judge, or an outside authority. It is the ship's commanding officer. Under the UCMJ, a commanding officer holds direct legal authority over the discipline and conduct of everyone under their command. Authority that, aboard a warship at sea, becomes remarkably concentrated and remarkably consequential. This is the legal reality that shapes everything else in this story. The captain of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier is not simply the ship's senior officer. They are, in a meaningful sense, the chief legal authority for everyone aboard, responsible for investigating wrongdoing, deciding how seriously to treat it, and, in many cases, personally determining the consequences. Before we continue, And the next section takes you inside an actual captain's mast hearing aboard a carrier, step by step. Please hit that like button and subscribe right now. Over 95% of people watching have not subscribed yet. It costs nothing and helps us keep bringing you these stories about the U.S. Navy that nobody else is telling. Let's keep going. The first responders at sea. Who actually investigates a crime aboard ship? When something happens aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, a fight, a theft, an assault, or something more serious, the response does not begin with the captain personally showing up. It begins with the ship's own internal law enforcement structure, a system most civilians never even know exists. Every U.S. Navy ship has a security department, led by sailors trained specifically in shipboard law enforcement, master-at-arms specialists. These are the sailors who function as the ship's internal police force. They patrol the vessel, respond to disturbances, investigate incidents, secure evidence, and maintain order among a crew of thousands living in extremely close quarters for months at a time. When an incident is reported or discovered, the master-at-arms team is typically first on scene. Their job, in that moment, closely resembles what a civilian police officer would do at any crime scene. Separate those involved, secure the area, identify witnesses, and begin gathering the facts before memories fade or evidence is disturbed. On a ship this size, with thousands of potential witnesses and dozens of compartments where an incident could have occurred, this initial response is critical. For more serious allegations, violent crimes, sexual assault, major theft, drug distribution, the investigation is often escalated to the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, commonly known as NCIS. Real NCIS agents, unlike their television counterparts, are federal civilian and military investigators who handle the most serious criminal matters across the Navy and Marine Corps. A carrier deploying on a long mission will often have NCIS representation embedded or readily available, precisely because serious crimes can and do occur far from any shore-based investigative office. Throughout this process, the ship's legal officer plays an essential role. This is typically a Navy Judge Advocate General Corps officer, an actual military lawyer, assigned to advise the commanding officer on the legal dimensions of any case. They help determine what charges might apply, whether the evidence supports moving forward, and what legal options exist. Even in the most conversationally referred version, aboard the newest and most advanced destroyers and carriers, this legal advisory role remains constant. The captain has an enormous amount of authority, but they do not exercise it in a vacuum. They rely on trained legal professionals embedded within the chain of command. So, by the time a case ever reaches the captain's desk for a decision, it has typically already been investigated, documented, and reviewed by trained specialists, security personnel, potentially federal investigators, and a military attorney, all working within the confined, self-contained world of a warship at sea. Here is a genuine question, and I want your honest answer. Does it surprise you that a U.S. Navy captain holds this much direct legal authority, investigating, judging, and sometimes personally deciding the punishment for a crime, with no jury and, aboard a ship at sea, no right for the accused to demand a different process? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments below. We read every single one. The captain's first decision. Mast or court-martial? Once an investigation establishes that a sailor likely committed an offense, the U.S. Navy captain faces one of the most consequential decisions in the entire process. How serious a path to take? There are, broadly, two roads available. The first is non-judicial punishment, universally known throughout the Navy as captain's mast. The second is a formal court-martial. Understanding the difference between these two paths reveals just how much authority a commanding officer genuinely holds. Captain's mast operates under Article 15 of the UCMJ, and it is designed for what the law considers minor misconduct. Though minor in a military context can still include things like assault, drug use, or theft, depending on severity and circumstance. It is not a criminal trial. There is no judge in the traditional sense, no jury, and no formal courtroom. Instead, the commanding officer personally conducts the hearing, reviews the evidence, hears from the accused sailor, and decides the outcome directly. The standard of proof at mast is notably different from a criminal court. Rather than the beyond a reasonable doubt standard used in criminal trials, the commanding officer only needs to believe it is more likely than not that the misconduct occurred. This lower bar reflects the nature of the proceeding. Captain's mast exists to maintain order and discipline efficiently, not to replicate the full machinery of a criminal prosecution.
Punishments available at mast are limited by law and tied directly to the rank of the commanding officer imposing them. They can include reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, restriction to the ship or certain areas, extra duties, and formal reprimands entered into a sailor's service record. In more serious cases, and depending on the officer's authority, mast can also result in confinement aboard the ship itself. Here is the detail that genuinely surprises people. In ordinary circumstances at a shore command, a sailor facing NJP generally has the right to refuse it and demand a full court-martial instead. But aboard a vessel underway at sea, that right does not exist. When a ship is out on deployment, the accused has no choice in how the process is applied. The decision belongs entirely to the commanding officer's discretion. This is one of the starkest examples of how differently the law operates once a sailor is embarked on a warship far from shore. For offenses the captain judges too serious for mast, or where the evidence and severity clearly point toward a formal criminal proceeding, the case is instead referred toward a court-martial, a dramatically more serious and formal legal process that we will explore in detail shortly. Inside a captain's mast hearing. What actually happens in that room? So what does a captain's mast hearing actually look like aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier? It is a genuinely unique legal experience, far less formal than a courtroom, but with consequences that can meaningfully shape a sailor's career. The tradition traces back centuries in naval history to a time when a commanding officer would literally stand at the ship's mast to hear complaints, grievances, and disciplinary matters from the crew. The modern version has moved indoors, typically to a designated space aboard the ship, but the core structure remains recognizably similar. The commanding officer, standing in judgment, addressing the sailor directly. The process begins well before the hearing itself. When mast is being considered, the command is required to notify the accused sailor in writing, outlining the alleged offense. From that point, the sailor has certain protections. They have the right to consult with legal counsel beforehand, the right to review the evidence against them, the right to present their own evidence, and the right to call witnesses in their defense. At the hearing itself, the commanding officer reviews the case, often with input from the legal officer standing nearby to advise on the legal dimensions of the proceeding. The accused sailor may make a statement in their own defense. Witnesses, if called, may be heard. And throughout, the atmosphere carries a weight that surprises many first-time attendees. It is not a casual conversation. It is a formal disciplinary proceeding conducted with real consequences, presided over by the single most powerful authority figure aboard the entire ship. At the conclusion, the commanding officer renders a decision. They can dismiss the charges entirely if the evidence does not support them. They can impose punishment if they find the sailor did commit the offense. Or, in more severe cases, they can determine that the matter genuinely warrants a full court-martial instead,
and refer it forward for that more serious process. If punishment is imposed, the sailor generally retains a right to appeal, typically within a short window of several days, with the appeal going up the chain of command to the next superior officer. Depending on the outcome, some punishments become part of a sailor's permanent record and can meaningfully affect future promotions, re-enlistment opportunities, and their broader career. It is worth being honest about the scale of this system. Across the entire U.S. Navy and Coast Guard combined, tens of thousands of sailors face captain's mast every single year, a reflection of just how central this process is to maintaining order and discipline across a force of hundreds of thousands of people, a significant portion of whom spend extended periods confined together aboard ships at sea. When the crime is too serious for mast. The court-martial process. For the most serious crimes committed aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, violent assault, sexual offenses, major theft, or other conduct considered too severe for captain's mast, the case moves towards something dramatically more formal: a court-martial. A court-martial is a genuine criminal trial conducted under military law, and it carries the weight of a permanent federal criminal record if the accused is convicted.
Unlike captain's mast, this is not a proceeding the commanding officer conducts personally as judge. Instead, formal charges are prepared, typically by the ship's legal officer working alongside the command, and the case moves through a structured judicial process involving a military judge and, in many cases, a panel of service members functioning much like a civilian jury. The accused sailor at a court-martial has substantial legal protections, closely mirroring civilian criminal proceedings. They are entitled to detailed military defense counsel at no cost, and in many cases, they also have the right to request an individual military counsel of their own choosing, if that attorney is reasonably available. It is not unusual for an accused sailor to have more than one military attorney working on their case simultaneously, a level of legal representation many civilians might not expect to find aboard a warship. Courts-martial themselves come in different levels of severity, reflecting the seriousness of the alleged offense, ranging from more limited proceedings with restricted potential punishments up to general courts-martial, which can result in the most serious consequences available under military law, including lengthy confinement and, for certain grave offenses, punishments as severe as those available in the civilian criminal justice system. Here is where a critical procedural safeguard becomes important, and it reflects a lesson the Navy learned from painful historical experience. Pre-trial punishment, any form of confinement or punitive treatment before an accused sailor has actually been convicted, is prohibited. A commanding officer cannot simply lock a sailor in the brig indefinitely as a form of preemptive punishment. If pre-trial confinement is genuinely necessary, for example, if the accused poses a flight risk or a danger to others aboard, it requires the commanding officer's formal approval, a written justification within a strict time frame, and, in many circumstances, review by a neutral officer who is not personally involved in the case, to confirm there is genuine probable cause to justify holding the sailor before trial. This is the far more serious end of shipboard justice, a genuine criminal court, operating under military law, but built with real procedural protections for the accused, even aboard a ship in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest civilian courthouse. Inside the brig. The jail hidden inside an aircraft carrier. Here is something that surprises almost every civilian who learns it. A U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, a floating city of 5,000 people, has its own jail hidden deep inside the hull, and it has a name every sailor knows: the brig. When confinement is authorized aboard ship, whether as punishment following mast, as a court-martial sentence, or in more limited circumstances as pre-trial confinement, sailors serve that time in the brig, a secure detention facility built directly into the ship's structure. It is a small, Spartan space, tucked deep within the vessel,
far removed from the rest of the crew's daily life. The amount of time a sailor can actually be confined through captain's mast alone is limited by law, and those limits depend on two factors: the rank of the commanding officer imposing the punishment and the rank of the sailor receiving it. More senior commanding officers hold authority to impose longer periods of confinement than more junior ones, and enlisted sailors of different ranks face different maximum limits. This tiered system is a deliberate legal safeguard, ensuring that the informal, judge-free nature of mast cannot be used to impose truly severe punishment without escalating to the more protected court-martial process. For sailors actually confined aboard, life in the brig is intentionally stark. It is meant to be a genuine consequence, not a comfortable timeout. Documentary footage from aboard the nuclear-powered carrier USS Nimitz has offered rare public glimpses inside an actual shipboard brig. Small cells, minimal amenities, and a strict, controlled routine, a world away from the rest of the carrier's 5,000-person community just a few decks away. But the brig aboard a single ship is only ever a temporary solution, suited to the relatively short-term confinement that mast or lesser court-martial sentences allow. For sailors convicted of serious offenses at a full court-martial and sentenced to significant confinement, the ultimate destination is very different. One of the Navy's dedicated confinement facilities on land, such as the Naval Consolidated Brig, a genuine, permanent detention facility built to hold prisoners from every branch of the armed forces for extended periods, entirely separate from the temporary shipboard cells used at sea. That is the full arc of confinement in the U.S. Navy's justice system. A small, secure space hidden inside the hull of an aircraft carrier for short-term or pre-trial situations, and for the most serious offenders, transferred to a permanent military prison once the ship eventually returns to shore. The weight on the captain. Command authority and its burden. Behind every one of these processes stands a single person carrying an extraordinary responsibility: the captain of the ship. And it is worth pausing to understand exactly what that responsibility actually means. A U.S. Navy aircraft carrier captain does not simply command a warship. They are, simultaneously, the chief legal authority for a population of 5,000 people, responsible for maintaining order, deciding how seriously to treat every alleged offense, and, in mast cases, personally serving as judge for their own crew. Sailors they may know personally have worked alongside for months and are ultimately responsible for leading into whatever mission comes next. This dual role creates genuine tension that experienced commanding officers describe candidly. The captain must be a leader who inspires trust and loyalty across the crew, and, simultaneously, a disciplinarian willing to impose real consequences on members of that same crew when the situation demands it. Getting this balance wrong in either direction carries real costs. Too lenient, and discipline and good order aboard the ship can erode. Too harsh, and the captain risks losing the trust and morale of a crew they depend on completely for the ship's safe and effective operation. The isolation of being at sea intensifies this weight considerably. On land, a commanding officer facing a difficult disciplinary decision can consult more broadly, request outside review, or simply take more time. At sea, decisions often have to be made more quickly, with fewer outside resources immediately available, even though the same legal standards and protections still apply. The legal officer aboard becomes an especially critical advisor in this environment, someone the captain leans on heavily to ensure that speed never comes at the cost of following the law correctly. There is also the matter of consequence beyond the individual case. How a captain handles disciplinary matters becomes known throughout the crew almost immediately, aboard a ship where thousands of people share close quarters and information travels fast. A captain seen as fair, consistent, and appropriately serious, earns the kind of respect that strengthens the entire chain of command. A captain seen as inconsistent, unnecessarily harsh, or too lenient can undermine discipline in ways that ripple through the ship's culture for the length of an entire deployment. This is the genuine burden of command authority aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier. It is not simply about running the ship's operations. It is about being trusted with a form of legal power that exists almost nowhere else in American professional life, and understanding that every decision made under that authority shapes not just one sailor's fate, but the discipline and cohesion of the entire crew around them. A real case that tested the system when the whole world was watching. To understand how seriously the U.S. Navy takes this legal system, it helps to look at a genuine case that tested it, one that drew intense public and international scrutiny. In 2001, the nuclear submarine USS Greenville was conducting a demonstration exercise off the coast of Honolulu when it performed a rapid emergency surfacing maneuver and collided with a Japanese fishing training vessel, the Ehime Maru, resulting in the tragic loss of 9 lives, including students and crew members. It was an accident with devastating consequences, and it triggered exactly the kind of intense legal process this video has described: investigation, review, and a decision about how the commanding officer would be held accountable. The Navy convened a formal court of inquiry, a serious investigative body involving senior admirals, to examine precisely what happened and whether the submarine's commanding officer had acted with criminal negligence. That inquiry concluded that while the commanding officer had made errors, the evidence did not support criminal negligence, and it recommended against pursuing a full court-martial. Instead, the officer faced an admiral's mast, the same fundamental process as a captain's mast, but conducted by a flag officer rather than a ship's captain, reflecting the higher rank involved. This proceeding excluded the possibility of prison confinement, but could still carry serious professional consequences: forced retirement at a reduced rank, forfeiture of pay.
This real case illustrates something important about how the U.S. Navy's justice system actually functions in practice. It is not simply a rubber stamp that automatically escalates every serious incident to the harshest possible outcome. It involves genuine investigation, genuine deliberation about intent and negligence, and a considered decision about which path, mast or court-martial, actually fits the specific facts of what happened. Even in a case involving international attention, loss of life, and enormous diplomatic sensitivity, the Navy's internal legal process worked through its established stages, exactly as it is designed to. It stands as a sobering reminder of what this entire legal framework actually exists to handle: not abstract hypotheticals, but genuine, sometimes tragic situations, where the captain's or commanding officer's judgment and the legal system built around them carries consequences that extend far beyond the ship itself. Climax: why this system exists. Justice at sea and what it really protects. Step back from every procedure, every rank structure, and every legal term, and a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier's justice system reveals something genuinely important about how a nation projects power responsibly across the entire globe. Think about what an aircraft carrier actually is. A floating city of 5,000 people, operating for months at a time, thousands of miles from the nearest American courthouse, carrying weapons systems and technology worth billions of dollars, and dependent entirely on discipline and order to function safely. Without a functioning legal system aboard, that ship could not operate. Discipline would erode. Trust between sailors would break down. And a vessel that depends on absolute precision and coordination to survive would become dangerously unpredictable. The system we have walked through, the Master-at-Arms investigators, the NCIS agents,
the ship's legal officer, captain's mast, court-martial, the brig hidden deep in the hull, exists to solve an extraordinarily difficult problem. How do you deliver genuine justice with real protections for the accused in an environment completely cut off from the ordinary machinery of civilian law? And, remarkably, the answer the United States Navy has built over more than 2 centuries manages to balance 2 things that seem to pull in opposite directions: speed and structure. A captain needs the authority to maintain order quickly, without waiting weeks for outside authorities to arrive. And at the same time, an accused sailor still deserves real rights: legal counsel, a chance to be heard, an appeal process, and, for the most serious offenses, a formal trial with genuine legal protections. This is what makes the captain's role, in this specific context, so remarkable. They are not simply commanding a warship. They are personally carrying the responsibility of delivering fair, functioning justice to 5,000 people in one of the most isolated environments a legal system can operate within, and doing so while also leading those same 5,000 people through whatever demanding mission comes next. Conclusion. Today, we went inside one of the least understood realities of life aboard a United States Navy aircraft carrier. What actually happens when a sailor commits a crime at sea? We learned about the UCMJ, the legal system that follows every service member wherever they go. We met the Master-at-Arms investigators and NCIS agents who respond when something goes wrong aboard ship. We understood the captain's pivotal choice between captain's mast and a formal court-martial, and why sailors underway lose the right to refuse mast that they would have on land. We stepped inside an actual mast hearing and inside the far more serious world of a court-martial. We discovered the brig hidden deep inside the carrier's hull and the tiered system that limits how long a captain alone can confine someone. The next time you picture a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier cutting through open water, remember that beneath the flight operations and the missile systems, an entire legal system operates quietly aboard, ready at any moment to investigate, to judge, and to hold 5,000 people to the same standard of discipline
that keeps the ship and everyone aboard it safe. If this video showed you something new about the United States Navy and how it delivers justice at sea, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss what we cover next. Next week, we are going inside how a U.S. Navy destroyer captain commands hundreds of sailors through 8-month deployments. The decisions, the pressure, and the responsibility that comes with leading a modern warship. You will not want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.